How far would you go to save the person you love? And could you look them in the eye every day, knowing that their entire life is a lie you created for them? This is the story of Marc Hamilton, a successful architect who had everything one could dream of. But he didn't know the most important thing. His success had already been paid for, with 10 years of someone else's life. Watch the story until the very end. It might just change the way you look at your own memories. Morning in suburban Connecticut was bathed in a soft, golden light. Marc, a high-flying architect whose signature style was etched into the skyline of New York City, stood in his kitchen, breathing in the aroma of freshly ground coffee. Today was his and Julia's 10th wedding anniversary. In his pocket sat an envelope containing the deed to an estate in Vermont, a gift intended to be the crown jewel of their perfect life. Julia came down for breakfast, as flawless as ever in her silk robe. But Marc, a man accustomed to the precision of lines and symmetry, noticed a nearly imperceptible flaw. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured her juice, and her eyes kept darting back to her phone. When a short notification chimed, she turned pale and, mumbling something about a headache, retreated quickly to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Left alone, Marc approached her laptop, which remained open on the table. The screen hadn't dimmed yet. Before his eyes was Julia's private bank account page. Yesterday evening, $50,000, her entire personal inheritance, had been withdrawn in cash. A cold chill stirred inside Marc. Why would his wife, a woman who wanted for nothing, need such a massive amount of untraceable cash without telling him? Marc gripped the steering wheel of his car so hard the leather of his gloves creaked under his fingers. The cabin smelled of expensive cologne, but the scent had suddenly become suffocating. Exactly 30 yards ahead of him sat Julia's car, a tidy white crossover that always looked as clean as if it had just left the showroom. She had parked it here, in the shadow of rusted shipping containers in Bridgeport, amidst broken bottles and old newspapers dancing in the wind. Julia stepped out of the car, and Marc involuntarily held his breath. In this gritty neighborhood, she looked like an exotic bird that had accidentally flown into a junkyard. She entered Joe's Diner, where an old bell rattled over the door. Marc adjusted the zoom on his phone camera. Through the fly-specked window, he saw her. Julia sat in a red leather booth, the upholstery cracked with age. Opposite her sat a man. His face was gray, as if dusted with ash. He wasn't smiling. He looked at Julia as if she owed him something profound. Marc watched his wife's trembling fingers pass a thick envelope under the table, secretly, like a criminal. The man took it, weighed it in his palm, and suddenly leaned forward aggressively. Julia recoiled, her back pressing against the sticky vinyl of the seat. Her lips were moving fast, explaining, pleading, while Marc felt an icy rage boiling inside him. Who was this man capable of driving his always composed wife to such a state of desperation? Marc's downtown office had always been his sanctuary. Minimalism, floor-to-ceiling glass, perfect order. But today, that order felt like a mockery. On his monitor glowed a file from a private investigator. Frank Miller, 38 years old, released yesterday after a 10-year sentence. Fatal DUI on I-95. Was intoxicated, fled the scene, later confessed. Marc read the lines, the letters blurring before his eyes. I-95. That same night 11 years ago. Graduation night. Fragments floated back. Heavy rain, Julia's laughter, the taste of oaky whiskey, and a sudden, dull thud. Then emptiness. A blackout. Julia had told him then, "You just passed out, and I hit a guardrail." No one was hurt. Marc drove to Frank's location at the Green River Motel. The hallway smelled of cheap detergent. When the door to room 14 opened, Frank wasn't surprised. He grinned, baring yellowed teeth. "Oh, finally. The great architect himself honors me with a visit. Who are you, and why is my wife paying you?" Marc spat. Frank laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "Your wife is paying for my silence, kid. I sat in a cage for 10 years so you could build your career." Your father-in-law, the judge, was very persuasive. He said, "Frank, you're hitting rock bottom anyway. Take the fall for him, and your mother will die in comfort. You were behind the wheel of that car, Marc. You hit that man. I was just standing on the shoulder and saw the whole thing. I sold my life to you, and now your little wife is being stingy, paying me pennies for my sacrifice." The house greeted Marc with a silence that rang in his ears. He walked into the living room without taking off his coat. Julia sat in an armchair, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of a street lamp slicing the space into stripes of black and gray. "Frank Miller," Marc said. Julia didn't flinch. She only slowly set her glass down on the side table. The sound of crystal hitting would echo like a gunshot. "So, her voice was lifeless. I know a man spent 10 years in prison for my sin. Why? Why didn't you let me answer for it myself?" She stood up and approached him. In her eyes, Marc saw a frightening, fanatical devotion. She touched his cheek with cold fingers. "Because you were everything I had. You were a genius. You wouldn't have survived in there. My father said one talented man is worth 1,000 of people like Frank. I saw you sleeping in the back seat after the crash, so helpless. I wiped your prints off the wheel. I called my father. While you were dreaming, we decided your fate." Marc felt a surge of fear. He looked at her delicate hands and saw the invisible filth of that night. Every kiss over the last 10 years now felt like part of a monstrous conspiracy against his conscience. They stayed up all night. Marc paced his office, tripping over stacks of blueprints. His life, which had seemed so solid, now looked like a building constructed on quicksand. Every line in his projects was a lie. Julia stood in the doorway, her silk robe shimmering softly in the lamp's glow. "What I gave Frank isn't enough," she said coldly. "He wants 100,000. For us, that's nothing, Marc. We give it to him, and he leaves. We can be happy again." "Happy? Julia, we're living in a tomb." "Stop it," she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "You aren't a hero in a movie. You are a successful man. The world works this way. Some pay, others receive. We paid Frank. If you go to the police now, you don't just destroy yourself. You kill me. I'll be charged as an accessory. Are you ready to see me behind bars?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sticky. She was right. The truth would destroy everything. His reputation, her life, their future. But the silence was slowly turning him into a living corpse. Mark walked to the window and saw dawn the color of raw steel. He realized he could no longer stay here. He had to choose, remain in this gilded cage, or step out into the cold void of the truth. The dawn brought no warmth. The living room smelled of expensive coffee and stale fear. Mark sat at the massive bog oak desk. The surface of the table felt like a mirror reflecting his own unrecognizable face. He looked at the check for $100,000. The white piece of paper felt heavier than the entire house. Julia stood by the window. She was already dressed in a flawless gray suit, her hair pulled into a tight bun, not a single strand out of place, just as no emotion dared to show on her face. Just sign it, Mark. It's just a business transaction. Do you really want to give all this up? For a ghost of a truth that won't bring anyone back to life. Mark remembered Frank's face. 10 years. 3,650 days in 4 walls because Mark wanted to draw beautiful buildings. Every detail in this room, the antique lamp, the plush carpet, everything was soaked in the years stolen from another man. You know what the worst part is? Mark's voice broke. It's that I allowed myself to forget. I wanted success so badly that my brain helpfully erased the truth. I'm an accomplice not because I hit that man, but because I agreed to this life. He began to write. The nib of the pen scratched against the heavy paper. I, Mark Hamilton, hereby declare the words fell onto the page steady and clear. With every sentence, the invisible noose around his neck, the one he hadn't noticed for 11 years, began to loosen. Julia turned. Her eyes had become 2 shards of ice. You are destroying me. Are you really ready to see me in prison? We're already in prison, Julia. We can't even touch each other without feeling the shadow of that guy from the highway between us. Mark signed his name one last time. He stood up, taking nothing, no phone, no wallet, no keys to his luxury SUV. He stepped out onto the driveway. The morning air was sharp and clean. He walked along the shoulder of the road toward the city administration building. He walked on foot, like a man who no longer had anywhere to hurry. In the sun-drenched living room, Julia was left alone. She stared at the piece of paper left on the desk. She knew, the moment Mark crossed the threshold of the precinct, her world would collapse. She slowly sank into her chair. In the silence of the house, the only sound was the methodical hum of the dishwasher. Mark didn't look back. He looked ahead. He knew that courts, disgrace, and gray stone walls awaited him. But for the first time in 11 years, he walked this earth not as a ghost, but as a man who finally had his own name. And that name had not been bought by anyone's silence, nor by a second signature on a check.